rain in Bali has been a constant companion these days, tapping a gentle rhythm against my window almost every day. You know what? Sometimes it's so comforting that I find myself napping with my dogs by my side. But today, we need to shake off the sleepiness and focus on something that's just as captivating: the political dynamics of Indonesia. Whether you're a seasoned listener or new to our podcast, you'll find this episode engaging and informative. We're diving into both internal and external affairs shaping the country's future. Don't worry if you missed yesterday's episode. We're using the same trusted sources to keep you up to date. So, whether you're a political junkie or just curious about what's happening in Indonesia, this episode is for you. Grab your favorite beverage and get ready for some insightful discussions. Stay tuned and stay safe.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep into the world of Indonesian politics.
Ooh, exciting.
It is. And it looks like you, our listener, are ready to get serious about this.
Yeah, you weren't kidding with that stack of articles and reports, even some government documents in there.
Right. So it's clear we've got a big mission ahead of us.
I'm ready. Where do we even start?
Well, we're going to try to understand the whole landscape, what's happening internally.
Yeah, okay, the internal politics, got it.
And how is Indonesia playing on that global stage?
So internal and external, the whole picture.
Exactly. And thankfully, I've got an expert here to help us connect all the dots.
I'll do my best. There's definitely a lot going on in Indonesia right now.
No kidding. Okay, let's just dive right in.
Right.
One thing that jumped out from all this material is the tension.
Tension.
Yeah, between PDI-P.
PDI-P.
That's the Indonesian Democratic Party of Struggle.
Right.
And President Prabowo's administration.
So between the biggest party and the president himself. That's interesting.
Right. And for those who maybe aren't super familiar with Indonesian politics,
yeah, it can be a bit confusing.
PDI-P is a major force. They hold the most seats in parliament right now.
Wow, so they've got a lot of power.
Big time. So
Yeah.
why all this friction, right? Why the tension?
Okay, yeah, what's the source of all this?
Well, a lot of it seems to come back to this investigation.
And then an investigation. Who's investigating who?
It's the Corruption Eradication Commission, the KPK.
Okay, the KPK, they're a big deal.
They are. And they're investigating Hasto Kristiyanto.
Wait, isn't he like a top guy in PDI-P?
Yep, he's their Secretary General.
Yeah.
And the KPK has named him a suspect in a bribery case.
Ooh, okay, so that's why there's tension. PDI-P's not going to be happy about that.
Not at all. They're calling it politically motivated, saying this is just a way to target them.
I see. So they're thinking it's a tactic, not a genuine investigation.
Exactly. And they're pointing to other cases involving people close to Prabowo.
So they're saying, hey, why aren't you going after these guys with the same energy?
Exactly. And they also bring up cases related to former President Joko Widodo.
Widodo, right. He was the one before Prabowo. So they see a pattern here.
They do.
Yeah.
And there's one specific case that keeps coming up, the Harun Masiku case.
Okay, now that name rings a bell. Remind me about that one.
So Harun Masiku was a PDI-P member. He was accused of bribing an election official.
To get a seat in parliament, wasn't it?
Exactly. But then he disappeared. Vanished.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember that now. It was a whole big thing.
It was. And PDI-P is basically saying that the KPK is going after Hasto now to distract from that unresolved case.
So they think it's a way to deflect and put pressure on them.
That's their argument. And get this, the KPK has also imposed travel bans.
Travel bans? On who?
On Hasto, the guy under investigation, but also on a former law minister, Yasona Lawoli.
And Lely, wasn't he from PDI-P too?
Yep, another connection to the party. So you can see why they're feeling targeted.
Yeah, it definitely looks suspicious from their point of view.
And they're not keeping quiet about it either.
So they're speaking out, publicly.
Publicly. Criticizing the government, criticizing the KPK.
Yeah.
Calling out what they see as bias.
Wow, that's pretty bold, considering PDI-P is, the biggest party.
It is. It suggests that there's some serious discontent brewing within the party.
Yeah, this isn't just a minor disagreement. This could have some real consequences.
Absolutely. So the big question is, what happens next?
Where does this go from here? Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Does this tension escalate? Does PDI-P try to make things even more difficult for the president?
Well, they could try to use their power to block things, right? Like important laws.
They could. Or even potentially attempt a no-confidence vote.
Whoa, that's serious stuff. A no-confidence vote could bring the whole government down.
It could. It would be a huge risk for them to take, though.
Right, they'd have to be pretty sure they had the numbers to pull it off.
And it would be a massive gamble.
Yeah, they'd have to weigh the risks and benefits carefully.
Because if they failed, it could backfire spectacularly.
Exactly. They could lose even more influence, maybe even alienate voters.
It's a high-stakes game they're playing.
Definitely high stakes. So what do you think is the most likely scenario?
It's tough to say for sure, but one possibility is that they try to negotiate.
Negotiate, huh? So behind-the-scenes talks, trying to find some kind of compromise.
Maybe. Or maybe Prabowo offers some concessions to try and smooth things over.
That could work, but he wouldn't want to appear weak either.
Right. So it's a delicate dance. He's got to appease PDI-P without losing face.
Exactly. It's all about balance, navigating those political waters.
This is already so interesting, and it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, yeah, we've got a lot more to unpack here.
We do. But this tension between PDI-P and the president, it really sets the stage for everything else we're going to talk about.
I agree. It's the backdrop to the whole story.
Because it raises the question, how stable is the Indonesian government right now?
And how does that impact their ability to deal with everything else on their plate?
Exactly. And that brings us to the next part of our deep dive, Indonesia on the world stage.
Okay, let's see how they're navigating global politics with all this going on at home. You know, it's fascinating to see how all this domestic turmoil in Indonesia might impact how they're perceived globally.
It's like they're juggling a lot, right? Trying to maintain a strong international presence while also dealing with all this political drama at home.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting because on one hand, you have Indonesia actively trying to boost its global standing.
Right. They want to be seen as a leader, especially in Southeast Asia.
Exactly. And they're doing that through things like, well, you know, active participation in those big international forums.
The G20, ASEAN,
Yeah,
all that.
all those. And they're pushing for some pretty ambitious goals, too.
Like what?
Well, for example, they're really focused on strengthening regional payment systems.
Makes sense, especially with all the talk about moving away from the U.S. dollar.
Right. And they're also big on digital financial inclusion, trying to get more people access to financial services through technology.
Okay, so they're definitely thinking big picture, long-term strategy stuff.
Absolutely. But then on the other hand, you have this uncertainty looming over everything.
The U.S. election.
The U.S. election, exactly. Because depending on what happens there, things could get pretty tricky for Indonesia.
Especially if, let's just say, someone who likes to put America first gets back in the White House.
You mean if Donald Trump wins? Yeah, that could definitely throw a wrench in the works.
Big time. His whole protectionist stance, his focus on confronting China.
It would put a lot of pressure on Indonesia to choose a side.
Which is something they've always tried to avoid, right?
Yeah.
That whole non-aligned approach.
Exactly. They don't want to be forced into picking between the U.S. and China.
Yeah, I can see how that would create some serious dilemmas for them, especially with all the Chinese investment pouring into Indonesia right now.
Oh, absolutely. We see companies like BYD, CNGR, CATL.
Those are the big Chinese EV battery makers, right?
Yeah, the big players. And they're investing billions in Indonesia.
It's like Indonesia is becoming this crucial link in the global EV battery supply chain.
It is. And the Indonesian government is rolling out the red carpet for these companies.
So streamlining approvals, making it easier to do business.
Exactly. They're investing in infrastructure, offering incentives.
It's a smart move, positioning themselves to be a major player in a rapidly growing industry.
But, and this is a big but, how will all this play out if the U.S. starts putting on the pressure?
Yeah, if they start demanding that Indonesia distance itself from China.
That's the million-dollar question, because it would put Indonesia in a really tough spot.
And it's not just about the economics of it all. It's about security too, right?
Absolutely. Indonesia is strategically important in the region.
They control key shipping lanes. They have a large military.
And their relationships with both the U.S. and China have huge implications for the balance of power in Southeast Asia.
So if they're forced to pick sides, it could really destabilize things.
It could. And that's why this internal political instability is so concerning.
Because a divided government, one that's caught up in these power struggles.
It's going to have a much harder time navigating these complex geopolitical challenges.
It's like they're trying to walk a tightrope while also dealing with an earthquake.
That's a great analogy. It really captures the precariousness of the situation.
This has already given me so much to think about.
Me too. And we've barely scratched the surface.
We haven't even touched on that oil and gas situation yet.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
One that could have serious implications for Indonesia's economic future.
And potentially their ability to achieve those ambitious goals we were just talking about.
Okay, let's dig into that then. What's going on with their oil and gas sector?
Well, the biggest problem is that their production has been declining for years.
And I'm guessing that's not good for a country that wants to be a major economic power.
Not good at all. They're heavily reliant on oil and gas revenues, and that decline is putting a real strain on their economy.
So what are they doing about it?
Well, they've set this ambitious target to reverse the decline by 2030.
Okay, so they're aiming to ramp up production within the next few years.
Exactly. But to do that, they're going to need to attract a lot more investment.
And that's where the problems start, right?
Right. See, Indonesia is facing stiff competition from other oil and gas producing countries.
Places that are maybe easier to do business in.
Exactly. And that's the big challenge for Indonesia right now. They need to figure out how to make themselves more attractive to investors.
Otherwise, that 2030 goal might be out of reach.
It might be. And that's why the article we read from The Diplomat is so interesting.
What does it say?
Well, it lays out a bunch of recommendations for how Indonesia can reform its oil and gas sector.
Like what kind of reforms?
Well, for starters, they talk about simplifying regulations.
Cutting through the red tape, making it easier for companies to get things done.
Exactly. They also talk about improving access to exploration data.
So giving companies more information about potential oil and gas reserves.
Exactly. And then there's the whole permitting process, which can be a real nightmare in Indonesia.
So streamlining that, making it quicker and easier to get the permits you need to start drilling.
Right. And then there's the issue of fiscal terms.
The taxes and royalties companies have to pay.
Yep. The article suggests that Indonesia might need to revisit those to make itself more competitive.
So basically sweetening the deal to attract more investors.
That's the idea. But, of course, any changes to fiscal terms would have to be balanced against the need to maximize revenue for the government.
It's a tough balancing act.
It is. But if Indonesia wants to revitalize its oil and gas sector, it's something they'll have to figure out.
This is already so much to digest.
I know, right? And we haven't even gotten to the really juicy stuff yet.
Wait, there's more?
Oh, yeah. Remember that whole KPK investigation into Hasto Kristiyanto?
How could I forget? That's like the biggest political drama happening in Indonesia right now.
It is. And it has the potential to really shake things up.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the latest?
So PDI-P, they're in a tough spot right now.
Yeah, it sounds like they feel stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Exactly. Because on one hand, they're seeing this KPK investigation as a direct attack.
An attempt to sideline them, maybe even weaken their influence.
Right. And they can't just sit back and let that happen.
Especially with the upcoming elections.
Oh, absolutely. They need to protect their position, show their supporters they're not going to be bullied.
But on the other hand, if they push back too hard,
they risk destabilizing the whole government.
And that's not good for anyone. It could hurt the economy, damage Indonesia's international reputation.
And ultimately, it could backfire on PDI-P itself.
Alienate voters, make them look power-hungry.
Exactly. So they need to tread carefully.
It's a delicate balancing act. Trying to defend themselves without going too far.
It really is. And the way they handle the situation, it's going to have huge implications for the future of Indonesian politics.
No kidding. Okay, so let's talk strategy. What are their options here? How can they push back against the government without, causing a full-blown crisis?
Well, they've got a few tools in their belt.
Lay it on me.
First off, they can make life difficult for the president and parliament.
Right. They have the most seats, so they can block legislation.
Exactly. Make it hard to pass laws, slow things down, force compromises, that kind of thing.
That's definitely one way to flex their muscles.
And then there's always the nuclear option.
A no-confidence vote. We talked about that earlier.
Yep, that's the big one. If they can rally enough support, they could potentially force the president out of office.
But that's a huge risk.
Massive risk, because if they don't have the numbers...
It could backfire and weaken their position even more.
And it would throw the country into chaos.
So it's a last resort, a high-stakes gamble.
It is. They'd only go that route if they felt they had no other choice.
This is so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like a political thriller unfolding right before our eyes.
It is. And we're right here in the front row seats.
I feel like we could talk about this for hours.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, we're out of time.
Aw, too bad. I was just getting warmed up.
Me too. But hey, this has been an amazing deep dive.
It really has. We covered so much ground.
We talked about this power struggle between PDI-P and the president. We looked at how Indonesia is trying to balance its relationships with the U.S. and China.
And we dug into the challenges facing their oil and gas sector.
It's amazing how all these pieces fit together.
It shows just how complex and dynamic Indonesian politics really is.
And it makes you realize that, what happens in Indonesia, it doesn't just stay in Indonesia.
Exactly. It has ripple effects throughout the region and even the world.
So for you listening, if you're interested in global affairs, if you're trying to understand the forces shaping our world today,
Keep an eye on Indonesia.
because this is a story that's only going to get more interesting in the years to come.
And who knows, maybe we'll do another deep dive down the road to see how things have unfolded.
I'd love that. But until then, keep learning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep thinking critically about the world around you.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.